All right, everyone, it's 11:02. Let's get going. Going to turn our webcams on here. Hello. Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar. My name is Corey Voss, and I'm going to be your moderator today. And if you have any questions, just submit them on the side panel for your GoToWebinar thing. And we will address all your questions at the end. Let's introduce our speakers for today. So today we have Jesse Hochholter from Google and Lindsay Steer.
Hey everyone, joining you from the Google Toronto office today. I'm normally based in Mountain View, but freezing here and happy to be with you.
And hey everybody, I'm Lindsay Steer. I'm the General Manager for Logical Positions Headquarters over here in sunny Portland, Oregon. So happy to be here as well. So what I wanted to cover really quick is just the agenda for what today is going to look like. Jessie is going to run through some of the important things that are happening in the changing consumer landscape. She's going to really touch on the growth of mobile and what that means for your business and your website. We're going to move into why we find AdWords to be a useful tool for our clientele. We're going to talk about setting yourself up for success, looking at attribution, also some best practices for setting up AdWords, and then we're going to move into the Q&A portion with a raffle for a Google Home Max at the end. So exciting stuff.
Okay, we're going to turn our webcams off so we can focus on the presentation, and we're going to hand it off to Jessie.
Great, thank you both. Very exciting stuff. So I want to talk to you guys about the first few things here. First things first is we want to talk about the landscape. So really, if you get nothing out of how things have changed in terms of digital advertising, it's this. We don't go online anymore, we live online. So we are constantly connected. We check our phones an average of 150 times per day. We spend almost 10 hours a day with screens, so whether that's our laptop or our phone or TVs, we are constantly connected in some way. When we are watching TV, we have multi-device usage going on, so we're usually on our phones or on our laptops or tablets doing other things. So this is a profound change. This means that lots and lots of things have actually changed in the industry, and what we're seeing is for particular industries. If you move to the next slide. Oh, okay, looks like, there we go. So let's talk about some of the changes that we've seen across the industries. Now, this one shouldn't be surprising, taxis to Ubers. I lived in Manhattan for a good portion of my career at Google, and I never took a taxi there. And it wasn't because I was rich enough to afford a car or I didn't walk, but I took Ubers because it's so easy. We are already connected to our devices. It's got our payment information stored. We can see exactly where this person is via GPS. You can see the little car driving around. It's convenient because of the fact that we're constantly connected and because of the fact that we expect things to be quick and easy. We just see Uber as a better way to do things. The taxi industry is starting to catch up with some of these apps, but it really put a big ding in their business model because they didn't see this change coming up and they didn't anticipate the way consumers were shifting like Uber did. Same thing with hotels and Airbnb, but one of my favorite examples is Blockbuster and Netflix. So I love Blockbuster. It was a big part of my childhood, going into the stores and finding the VHS tapes that had the little black ones with the actual tape in it behind the empty ones with the actual movie, on the front. So that was a big part of my childhood, and I loved it. But Blockbuster was kind of blindsided by the fact that consumers were changing. And so just to kind of give you an example of this, I'm going to tell you a quick story about how Blockbuster, the CEO of Blockbuster was sitting in his office and he got visited by the owner of Netflix. This was back in 2000. And the owner of Netflix said, hey, I've got a deal for you. I am going to sell you my little company, Netflix. This is back, when it was mostly about the little white envelopes that you had to mail in to get a new one. And he said, I'm going to sell you my company for $50 million. And he got laughed out of the room. This was in 2000. Fast forward 10 years to 2010. Blockbuster, as we know, went bankrupt, and we don't see them anymore. And Netflix now, I just took a look, and their market cap is $84 billion with the B. So that $50 million deal that they proposed to Blockbuster, that was a big misstep that they didn't take that. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that Blockbuster just didn't anticipate the things consumers were doing, the ways in which we were shifting the ways we engaged with media, and also with, you know, how we live our day-to-day lives. So this also means profound changes in media. So what we're seeing for businesses is there's a huge shift in digital. We saw in 2010 digital spend in terms of how you were, you know, allocating your spend across different medias was about 17%. But what we're seeing is by next year, e-marketers are anticipating that this is going to be above 37% and could be even more. So we're seeing this being an $83 billion market, and something that you just can no longer ignore because of the fact that we check our phones 150 times per day, because of the fact that we're spending 10 hours a day looking at screens, and we are constantly connected. So this is really important, and this might look kind of scary for businesses because I know it's not traditionally how we do things. My background before I came to Google was in newspaper, so I completely understand, you know, the mix of traditional media advertising and digital. But we need to go where the consumers are. So not to say that that stuff isn't still effective in its way, but we need to make sure that we're shifting with consumption. So what is really fueling this growth? Well, it's mobile, and this shouldn't be surprising. Mobile is the main driver of these shifts that we're seeing in ad spend, but also in how, you know, the different industries are transforming. So, you know, with taxis and Uber, the mobile phone is really what made Uber possible. And then same thing with Netflix. We're watching a ton of our content on mobile devices. YouTube, now majority of that content is consumed on mobile. So we can see here that by 2019, eMarketer's anticipating that the percentage of digital spend that's going to be mobile is about 72%. And again, this makes sense because this is about what we see the split being in terms of our consumption. So mobile is this driver. So we're going to talk pretty extensively about mobile here. Now, before we get into that, this is really, really interesting, and I love this slide because it just really encapsulates the way mobile has changed the customer journey and why we have to focus on mobile. So one is immediacy of action. We want things now. So if I'm sitting with someone and they, you know, for example, they need to, they're telling me something, and I'm like, that kind of sounds a little bit like BS. I don't say, I'm going to Google that when I get home and see if that's actually true. I Google it right there in front of them, right? So we want to know things now. We want to act on any stimulus as soon as we have it. Same thing if I see someone wearing, you know, a cute pair of shoes. I'm going to say, I'm going to try to look those up right now. So we act on that stimulus right now because we can, because we're constantly connected. The next thing that's important for businesses is these high expectations. So we really expect a frictionless experience and high relevance to, you know, who we are and what we're interested in. So it's this kind of interesting dichotomy of, you know, we're a little bit creeped out when Google knows, you know, or our phones or Apple, whoever it is, know exactly where we are and what we're doing, and we see those ads following us around, and we're like, this is too creepy, I don't like it. But at the same time, if we type in our phone, you know, coffee shop near me, and it doesn't know that I'm in Toronto, Canada right now, then I'm kind of pissed because I'm like, hey, I said near me. I didn't say, you know, back in California. I didn't say, you know, 1 mile that way. I said near me. So we don't, you know, aren't impressed by this frictionless experience anymore. We've come to expect it. So really, really high expectations from our consumers, and we'll talk about that with mobile in just a sec here. And the third one, which I think is most important for small businesses, is these unscripted decisions. What this means is consumers, we're seeing a shift from loyalty to big brands to their need in the moment. So if you're not a huge brand and you don't have a ton of money to spend on branding, that's okay. Because if you are relevant and there and delivering exactly what that person needs in that moment, then the likelihood of you being chosen over that big brand is actually higher. So branding is still important because, you know, you want them to have some kind of trust in your company so that they're more likely to choose you. But no longer do we need these huge advertising spends for branding just so that people say, hey, I'm thirsty, I should get a Coke. It's more about relevance in that moment since we are constantly connected. Okay, so, and just to drive this point up further, I don't know if you guys have this feeling ever where I do this a lot because I travel a lot, where I'll be in the airport and I'll like leave my phone on that little metal thing in the bathroom, which is gross in and of itself, but I get this kind of like feeling like I'm going to throw up because I'm like, where's my phone? I'm like, it feels like I don't have pants on. That is actually called nomophobia. That is a real thing. This is a real word that has been added to our vernacular, and it is a fear of being without mobile device, power source, or service area. So this is real. We've gotten to the point where there's actually a phobia named after being away from your phone. People are on their phone all the time. So we need to make sure that we keep that in mind when we're advertising and when we're trying to get to our consumers. We need to have that really mobile first mentality, which is, I'm sure you guys have heard this over and over again. So because this is true, we need to make sure that step one is really nailing your mobile website. And the reason for this is because, you can work with Logical Position, you can work with another partner, you can get lots of leads to your site. That's great. So you can get leads to your site, but if you don't have a great mobile website, then those leads may not convert. And so that's going to be just a waste of money. So it's like akin, and you'll hear me bring this analogy up again, is like if you send out invitations to a party and those invitations are really appealing and it sounds like it's going to be super fun, and you're like, there's going to be ice sculptures and hula dancers and there's going to be lots of drinks and food, it's going to be so great, and then you get there and it's like no one's there, it's kind of like dark and scary, and maybe you see like, someone's grandma in the corner or whatever, you're like, this is not what I was expecting, you're going to bounce, you're going to leave. So this is the same thing. We can send out those great invitations that make people want to come to your party, but if your party's not cool, that's a problem. So this is where we want to make sure we get your party up to speed. If you guys are following me, this is a little bit weird the turn it took, but that's okay. We're going to go with it. So 2 things that you want to make sure are at your foundation are performance and speed. And speed is something we put a ton of emphasis on here at Google. And the reason is because, let's be honest, would you wait in this line? Let's say there are 2 products, right? So you want to go and you want to get a hot dog or whatever, bagel, whatever this is. You want to get a bagel in this line, or next door there's only 2 people in line, or maybe it's ready to go and you can just walk right up to the counter. Which line would you wait in? Right? You go to the shorter line because this is a frustrating experience. If the goods are comparable or the services are comparable, then why would you wait in this line? You're probably going to leave and go next door to the other business that doesn't have a line. Same thing with online. If I look something up and I go to a website and it's super slow, I'm probably going to leave and move on to the next business I see that has what I need. Okay? So to put this in number format and not just a visual people standing in line for a bagel, speed actually reduces bounce rate significantly. So if you're slow, it's going to increase the bounce rate, and the faster you are, the fewer people are going to bounce. So you can see some stats here. 53% of people will abandon a site if it takes more than 3 seconds to load. 3 seconds, that's really quick. The majority of websites that we see, like on average, are over 10 seconds. So 3 seconds is very quick, and 53% of people, the majority of people will abandon if it takes longer than that. 52% say that fast load time is important to brand loyalty. So in order for them to keep coming back, load time on the site is something that is a factor there. And then these stats are really interesting. I won't belabor them because I know you guys are smart people and can read, but what we see is engagement is decreased, which leads to a decrease in conversions, and then, of course, that leads to a decrease in revenue. So if we're slow by 1 second, this is going to increase our bounce rate by 8%. That is going to decrease our conversions by 7%, which could result in, on average, about over 2% decrease in cart size, or meaning the actual revenue. So really important that we understand that this is the basis of what we need to do, because if we're sending the people somewhere where they're not having a great experience, they're going to leave and that advertising dollar wasn't spent in the best way possible. So here's another, this just kind of drives home that point. People, if you prefer graphs, you can see here that speed directly impacts online revenue. If a mobile page loads 1 second faster, we can see a 27% increase there in that conversion rate. So this just kind of shows you that, as you're moving to the right of this graph, we're seeing that this is the increase in load time. And as you're doing that, you're seeing that there is a correlated decrease in revenue and actually conversion rate. So really important that we nail how quickly this is, that our site is loading so that we can get the most out of our conversions. And I love this because not to do, I hate to do a plug for Amazon here, but this is really, really interesting because we know Amazon has a ton of traffic on their website, ton of things happening all the time. They reduced latency on their site by 100 milliseconds. And what this did was increase their revenue by 1%. 1% increase in revenue for Amazon is a whole lot of revenue. So in 100 milliseconds, that is so tiny, but you can see it's just the impact that this could actually have. So really, really interesting stuff here. So what are some of the common problems? And before I rattle these off, I would highly recommend if you reach out to one of the logical position folks here that are on the call. They can actually do a diagnosis for you and let you know what's going on with your site and how you stack up. There's some free tools out there that you can use, but it's a really good idea to see kind of where you stand. Because like we said, 52% are abandoning if it takes over 3 minutes, or 3 seconds, sorry, 3 minutes is a long time, 3 seconds for your site to load. So know where you stand there, know where you're at. Is your page too heavy? Are your images too big? Are there too many resources on the page? Are too many resources required? Do you have all these fun things on your site that are meant to make it more a great experience in terms of like pop-ups and stuff, but they're requiring so much resource, they're so resource intensive that they're making the page that much slower? Are you prioritizing information above the fold? That is the most important because that is what's going to load first. Get that stuff to load first, and then it's okay if it takes a little bit longer for the stuff below the fold to render. So these are some common problems. Check out if any of these are things that you might need to work on in your site. So I recommend doing that. There are mobile speed tests, mobile friendliness tests, or just talk to my friends here at Logical Position. They're also really great with this stuff and can give you some free pointers. All right, so at the end of the day, focus on mobile site performance. This is going to lead to a lower bounce rate. It's going to lead to higher conversions. It's going to give you more value for your advertising dollar, which in the end is going to make you more profitable, which is what we care about. We care about your businesses being more profitable. So in order to drive that additional revenue so that you are more profitable, focus on the party and then send those really great invites out, okay? And speaking of invites, once that's all solid and your site is a conversion machine, you need to get people there. Okay, so there are various ways you can do this. Google AdWords is a great one, and one that Lindsay's going to be talking about in just a few minutes here. But just want to kind of give you the value prop of Google AdWords and why this is such a great invitation to send. So 1 is reach, 2 relevance, and 3 ROI. So let's just go through these in turn before I pass it over. So number 1, reach. Google AdWords is amazing in terms of reach, and this shouldn't be surprising. So 80% of people use search engines to find local information. That number is probably higher now. Google is the largest search engine. We see over 100 billion searches happening every single month. Not to mention we have other things like YouTube, right? YouTube reaches over 90% of the population, which is massive in terms of reach. Then we also have the Google Display Network, which also reaches over 90% of the population. And so what this reach means is that you can get more granular with your targeting. So obviously, most of the businesses on here right now aren't going to want to target the entire US or aren't going to want to target the entire world. But when you have that reach, it means you can get more granular and you can target your neighborhood that you can care about. You can target your region, your city, your zip, you can reach people who are interested in what it is you have to offer. So this has to do with the next one, which is relevance. So relevancy is all about reaching people at the exact moment they're looking for you. So we have this reach, so we can say, of all of these people that are using Google, that are on the display network, that are on YouTube, I want the people that are in this area that are showing a clear interest for my product or my service and who are using those keywords, who have that intent. That's what we care about, is that intent. So we can get that specific, and what that means is that it's going to be, it's going to be better for that person because you are extremely relevant to what they're looking for, so that's going to lead to higher conversions. Which brings me to the last point and my favorite, return on investment. So Google is not only does it have that huge reach and you can be extremely relevant, but even to that very relevant pool of people that you're showing up for, you only pay when they actually are interested enough to click through to your website. So I'm showing to certain geography, to people who are searching for, emergency plumbing, and even if they see my ad, that impression is free. It's only if they click through to the site, if they're interested enough in my message, that is the only time that you actually pay. So really, really important that we understand that this is all about finding those people who are interested enough to get to your site. Not only that, we can measure beyond the click. Lindsay's going to talk to you a little bit about attribution and conversion tracking, but quick shout out to Google Analytics. It's a free tool that you should have set up on your site that can give you a huge insight into where your traffic's coming from, not just from Google, but from all different sources. So that's kind of the little pitch for AdWords, those invitations to your awesome party. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it back over to Lindsay.
Hey everybody, yeah, thank you so much, Jesse, for touching on all that stuff. I'm just going to go ahead and give you guys just a super brief overview of who Logical Position is and basically why we're in this webinar with Google. So basically, Logical Position is what's called a Google Premier Partner Company. We were actually one of the original 30 Google Premier Partners, and what that basically means is that based on some different metrics, including client performance, client retention, and some other aspects, we were selected to be in a very elite tier of companies that support Google AdWords and other Google advertising solutions. So Logical Position, we do a lot, but specifically our areas of emphasis are Google AdWords, search engine optimization, and also web design. So again, this webinar is largely geared towards the AdWords end, and also we're going to touch on some SEO portions. We work with a variety of different types of companies across all different verticals. We've really found that by not specifying in a particular industry, we can actually bring greater benefit through just kind of cross diffusion and sharing ideas and strategies. So for instance, something that we're doing on a really large e-commerce account like Hannah Anderson might actually have some application to maybe a local retailer who's trying to drive brick and mortar traffic. Things like that. So we're headquartered in Portland, Oregon, like I said, so we're just Jesse's neighbor up here to the north. And we also have offices around the country, so odds are we're probably local to you in some way, shape, or form. Right now we've got Austin, Texas, Charlotte, North Carolina, Chicago, Las Vegas, and I think actually just 5 days ago we opened an office in Denver. So we're super excited about that. So anyway, I'm going to kind of move forward. Jesse did a great job of talking about what your website needs to be set up for success, and I'm going to kind of talk about what happens after that point. So this is where we get into attribution. Jesse also did a great job of touching on Google Analytics. I would hope that everybody who's in this webinar is familiar with Google Analytics and the capabilities. If you're not, definitely reach out to one of the two of us. It is a free system, and it is essentially a GPS tracker of what's happening on your website. So, what you really want to ask yourself when you're looking at your website first and foremost is, what is your goal? For most people, it's going to fall into kind of these three categories that you see. Is the goal of your website to generate a purchase, whether that's like a hotel booking or an actual purchase of product? Is it to get a phone call? Do you, convert your leads best by phone, like say a taxi service or a limousine service? Or is it to get a contact form, like a request for proposal or just someone submitting their details to you? We work with a lot of industrial clients where, you know, obviously getting people onto their website, inquiring about product is obviously primary. It's different for everybody. It might be all three, it might just be one. So understanding what the most advantageous thing is going to first and foremost help you set yourself up for success. And then what you really need to do is you need to track it. And that's where Google Analytics comes into play. I talk to a lot of business owners, whether, again, we're talking about a huge e-commerce company or we're talking about a small mom and pop shop, and it seems to be kind of across the board. A lot of people don't understand or realize the capabilities of tracking that you can leverage in Google Analytics. So for example, what I can look at when analytics is set up correctly on someone's website is I can see how many people came to their website from Facebook and how many people then purchased a product versus how many people came through Google AdWords and purchased that same product or a different product. And when you have that level of information, you can really make incredible, profitable interactions and changes to not only your website, but your advertising sources and a whole litany of other things. So we'll go ahead and pop over to conversion tracking. So this is the AdWords specific kind of attribution. So what I always recommend to clients is first and foremost have your Google Analytics tracking set up to track those goals. There are some different ways that you can do it. Then when you set up an AdWords account, you have the option to import those goal metrics from Analytics, which is nice and handy. Or you can basically generate a conversion code through the AdWords interface that you can input into those interaction points on your website. I'll give you just a super basic example. Let's say that I am a wedding venue in Portland, Oregon, and I want to know how many prospective brides or mothers of the bride are contacting my facility. Well, what I can do is when somebody successfully fills out the contact form on my website, I can have that form redirect to a thank you page. And then the conversion code is embedded in the HTML on that thank you page. Whenever you hit it, it reports back to the system, and it'll actually tell the system things like what keyword did they click on and then convert? Where did they come from? What sort of browser are they using? What sort of device are they using? What part of the Portland metro area or what part of the country? So again, when you have that information and you're looking at a Google AdWords account, that's where you can make the best, most profitable optimizations. If there is a particular keyword or set of keywords that are creating 90% of your conversions, that's really important to know so that you can treat those keywords, ads, whatever it might be, differently and give them priority over other areas. So, you know, a lot of this information seems really creepy as a consumer, but as an advertiser, it's incredible. The ability to look at that data set and understand where your profitability is coming from online and how to harness it is just incredible. So one of the other aspects that we wanted to talk about outside of, you know, tracking when a purchase happens or when a contact form is submitted is call tracking. Call tracking is really important to a lot of local businesses, but it can also be super important to e-commerce companies. So there are a lot of different call analytics companies that pick up some of the areas that Google AdWords conversion tracking doesn't account for. So one of the systems that we like to recommend to people is called CALLRAIL. We also use a system called MarchX. But what call tracking does is it gives you another way to capture total attribution of things happening on your website. So a call tracking code goes on the back end of your website, and what it does is it actually identifies what source someone is coming from. So if they're coming from Facebook, or if they're coming from organic search, or if they're coming from Google AdWords. And based on that source traffic, it'll actually rewrite the phone number that somebody sees. It's seamless for you as the business owner. Phone calls still come to your phone just as they usually would. However, the sheer act of rewriting the number gives us attribution. So we know if the 5551 number was dialed, it came from Facebook, or the 5552 came from Google AdWords. So again, you can start to really weigh your different channels and see which are creating the greatest amount of profit. The reason why CALLRAIL tends to work really well for our clients where phone calls are super important is because CALLRAIL will interact with your Google AdWords account, and it will give you keyword level attribution for phone calls. So again, let's say I am maybe an emergency veterinary clinic, and so I'm really dependent on phone calls. Things are happening quickly. People, you know, call and then come in. Well, if I have that call tracking information, I not only see what those top keywords are, but I can also get recordings of the call if that's going to be pertinent, and I can get names on caller IDs and phone numbers and things like that in the reports as well. Actually, kind of a funny side story on that. I have a great client who's worked with us for a long time. He has a vet clinic in North Carolina, and he called me after we'd been working together for just a few months to talk about how the call tracking had been so great. He was able to identify all of these kind of areas that were profitable that he hadn't realized were previously. And side note, he did also tell me that he realized he needed to hire a new receptionist. After going through and listening to the calls and listening to the recordings, he realized that she maybe wasn't handling some of these situations in the best possible way. So, you know, if you have the data, sometimes you find really interesting, you know, analysis on that. And on this slide, you can just see an example of, this is a CALLRAIL report. It's not going into the keyword level, but what you can see on here is somebody who's engaging in traditional advertising in addition to digital, and it can also carry into those different aspects as well. So for instance, if you are running a billboard ad, I'll tell you why you shouldn't in a little bit, but if you are, you can have a CALLRAIL tracking number on that as well, and it'll give you attribution for that versus your, you know, Google AdWords versus your search engine optimization. So it's definitely a cool system. Some people don't like the idea of having their phone number rewritten, but you know, it can be super beneficial. So we'll go ahead and switch over to the SEO and PPC slide. So it happens pretty often where I talk to people and they prescribe to one of two philosophies. They are either huge fans of SEO or they're huge fans of PPC. And I'm sure you guys can probably put yourself into one of those categories as well. The real kind of issue with that is, in general, it's always best to diversify. You know, with stocks, they talk about it, and with any investment, you know, you really need to make sure all of your eggs aren't in one basket. As we know, Google changes their search engine algorithm all the time. And PPC can just help you get double coverage in areas where you don't necessarily have a natural presence. So one of the, we'll run through the pros and cons of both of these. So basically in search engine optimization, the benefit is that once you have that presence under your pertinent keyword areas, your click costs are free. You're not paying on a per click basis. It also has a really high return on investment because of the high credibility. If you are showing up, you know, number 1, number 2, number 3, people are going to, you know, see you as a more viable business because that's why they're using Google to find the most viable results in a listing. Some of the things that we find problematic typically with search engine optimization is that it is a slow ramp up period. I'm sure that every single one of you would love to be number 1 under every single keyword that you have, and there's a reason why you're not, and it's because it takes a while and it takes a lot of content and things of that nature. So it is a great strategy, but it takes a while, and it's also slow to change. If you get a new product, or if you need to advertise, you know, a new location, that's going to take a while to really creep up the listings, and that's where PPC can be a very beneficial complement. Yes, it is a pay-per-click system, so Google sets prices on different types of keywords in different areas based on competition. But in an optimized account, just like Jesse touched on earlier, you're only paying when somebody is finding that listing to be relevant and when they're interested in your product and they want to find out more. So you do have a quality aspect of it, which is really nice. Also, it's very instant. I can literally have someone get an ad populated to the front page within, I don't know, half an hour. So it's great for testing. If we are dealing with a client who is unsure of what they need to do first, or if they have a limited budget, or they really haven't engaged in digital previously, we will always recommend starting with Google AdWords because we're not going to allow assumptions to basically create a digital strategy. So if we put together a list of 50 keywords, you know, that ultimately we would like to target for search engine optimization, I am going to run those through PPC, and I'm going to make sure that those are profitable keywords for our clients. Using conversion tracking, like we touched on, I might be able to, you know, wean that list down to really 5 or 10 keywords that I know drive incredible profit for that client. And that's really important to know before you spend 6 months or a year moving up the first page of Google. So PPC's nimble. We just came off Black Friday. That is a great instance of where pay-per-click is just monstrously effective. If you have any type of promotion schedule, or if you like to run any sort of coupons and things like that, you can instantly get those up through PPC to hit really critical times and really critical audiences. And that's going to, just complement and deepen the profitability of what you're doing online. So now that we've kind of talked about, the pros cons between the two, I did want to give just a brief SEO breakdown. I could literally spend probably 3 days straight talking about the details of this. So excuse me that it is a bit dumbed down. Please get in touch with me later if you have more detailed questions on this, but I don't think anybody wants to sit here for like 8 hours, so bear with me. Really we fundamentally break SEO down into two categories: on-site, off-site. On-site is fairly self-explanatory, but I'm going to run you through just a couple points of it. So you think about how Google operates. It's essentially an algorithm, and it is intelligent, but it is not that intelligent. So what you have to do with your SEO is think about the fact that you are speaking to an algorithm and you are telling it what the things on your website are. So one of the best examples of this is an image. We know what an image is. We can see clearly that it's a dog, being walked by its owner, but Google can't tell what that picture is, and so it relies on the code behind that picture to tell it where that should be categorized and where it should show up. So in a simplistic form, that's really what you're doing all over your website, is you're making it very Google friendly, very easy for Google to read, and very easy for Google to categorize under those searches that are most pertinent to you. Offsite is kind of what we refer to as the PR part of this. So that's really what we're doing, is creating digital PR. It is what the internet is saying about your website. There are what we call high authority domains and low authority domains. So let's use an example. Let's say that there's a new hotel in downtown Portland, and they're trying to build their offsite search engine optimization. And there is Jenny's travel blog that picks up an article about this new hotel in Portland, and then the New York Times picks up an article about this hotel in Portland. Which one do you think is going to have more credibility? Probably the New York Times. So Google has rankings that it gives to websites to indicate their authority, and the higher ranked in authority that a website is, the more you want it to link back to your website. So again, that's where we take a PR approach. We have dedicated writers and we have networks in which we operate, where we can basically put articles out for syndication to really high authority domains. We definitely want to keep up fresh and recurring content, push press releases, and also, this is totally a weird side note, but a really interesting thing I found out, universities have really high authority domains, and you have opportunities to list basically scholarships on their scholarship pages, which are some of the most visited web pages within kind of, the university sphere. So for example, maybe it doesn't make sense for your business, but maybe it does. You could theoretically offer a $500 scholarship to business students attending Oregon State University, and that will link to your website. And even something like that can actually get you pretty decent traction. So there are all sorts of ways that you can, create validity and create noise about your business. So now let's move to the kind of PPC breakdown. So as we've covered, what does PPC stand for? It's pay-per-click. Pretty much most people are familiar with what these ads look like. You go to Google and you do a search for, hair salon near me or tool shop near me, and you see the ads that populate on the front page of Google. Those are search network ads. Those are very high intent. Somebody does a search looking for your product, you show up. But those are only one place where Google AdWords ads actually show up. So there are other places that Jesse alluded to, like the display network. The display network is basically 43 billion web pages around the internet that have Google placements where you can put a graphic ad or a video ad. You can obviously narrow that down significantly. Again, if we're talking about the New York Times has thousands of index pages, and they're not running the advertising on every single one of those pages, but you can, basically do display network targeting in certain aspects on that website in addition to other websites. Google Shopping is another one where if you do a search for a particular product like size 12 Nike Jordans, you'll see a product show up, you'll see a price, you'll see the seller. Those are phenomenal for e-commerce because they qualify before people even click on your ad. So if you're e-commerce and you're not running shopping, definitely get in touch with me because you're missing out on a huge revenue stream from that end. And then there's remarketing. If you don't know what remarketing is, I guarantee that you do, or at least you've experienced it. Anybody who shopped at Amazon and then found that product chasing them around the internet for weeks, you have experienced remarketing, and you have experienced aggressive remarketing. So a lot of the time when people are like, oh yeah, I don't like those ads, they're annoying, it's because it's an advertiser not doing it correctly. You can actually set things like frequency caps so that somebody doesn't see your ad 50 times in a day, you know, and 7 days a week. And there are a lot of ways to make it very nuanced to your particular business. One of the other things I wanted to touch on is a lot of times I hear from people, you know, ads don't work for me. But a lot of times people don't realize the capability of some of these advertising strategies. So the display network is a really good example of that. I work with a lot of industrial companies. We work with a company that manufactures pumps for basically oil and gas and for, you know, a litany of different liquid purposes. And the display network is an amazing opportunity for them because we can look at websites that are in their industry and specific to, you know, their B2B market, and then we can run graphic ads in those placements. So it's the modern adaptation of print. It used to be that you would find the magazine that was applicable to your customer base. You'd find out when they were running their yearly editorial about your industry, and then you'd take out a full page ad next to it. That's essentially what the display network can do, and it can work very, very well for those people. So now let's talk a little bit about setting up an AdWords account, or if you have an existing AdWords account, some of the things to kind of be aware of. Any of you in this group that are using Google AdWords Express, I would like you to shoot me an email. Jesse and I were actually talking about this yesterday. So basically what Google Express is it is the diet version of AdWords, or AdWords Lite, if you will. There is kind of an ongoing debate in people in my industry about the pros, cons of the system. I'm going to go ahead and say that I have yet to find a pro of using Google AdWords Express. Google AdWords Express is a very easy to set up, aesthetically pleasing, you know, easy user experience form of AdWords. The problem with it is that it hides all of the advanced settings, and in turn it also hides all of the ability for you to customize settings. So some of the things that we take issue with when it comes to Google AdWords Express is that you cannot do traditional conversion tracking. So those purchases that we were talking about, the contact form submissions, you can't do that. What you can do is you can track click-to-calls from mobile phones, but that's it. So because you can't do that, you also can't prioritize certain things, like really profitable keywords. You can't tell the system, hey, spend the majority of my budget on these things that I know create a ton of profit. It won't let you do that. It basically creates or treats everything super equally, which sounds nice, but when we're talking about advertising and making money is not nice. So there is an option to basically switch your Express account over to AdWords, and we can talk about that, and I'm happy to sit down with anybody and show them how to do it. But, you know, there are just, the way that I like to think about it is, you know, each business is super unique. You operate much differently than the other 50 people in your industry. And so why would you treat your business like it's every other business by using a system that's just super defaulted and super cookie cutter? And AdWords in and of itself allows you to customize everything to hit your specific goals. And that's really what's going to be important, and that's going to be what results in the greatest amount of profit for you. So other notes when setting up AdWords, and these are pertinent to people who have already set up AdWords, even if you've been running it for 5 or 10 years. These are just things that I tend to see, and also things that I want to make people aware of if they are going to set the system up. So one of the things when you set up your AdWords account is obviously setting your budget. Makes sense. You have to pay Google for the clicks. They appreciate that as their #1 revenue generator. So what we typically do is we use a platform, not a platform, a software tool that's available called the Keyword Planner. it makes estimates about what a cost per click is for a particular search term. So it's a great place to go for you if you've never considered doing this, to just basically gauge what sort of budget you would need to invest. So what we do is we look at the cost per click on a particular keyword advantageous to that client business. And then what we do is we multiply it by 3 for basically a daily budget, and then we multiply it by 30 for a monthly budget. So let's say you're an attorney and your cost per click is like $10. We'd multiply it by 3, which would be a $30 daily budget, and then we'd multiply it by 30, which would be a $900 monthly budget, roughly. One of the things to note is that very recently Google changed how they work daily budget within AdWords, and you can now overspend up to 100% in a certain day. It used to be 20%, but now it's 100%. The reason why they did this, and I should note, it doesn't affect your monthly budget, but what they were seeing is that particular times of day had a lot of traffic and particular times of day had little traffic. So in order to satisfy demand, they would take budget that was allocated for, say, a Saturday and move it to a Monday so they could generate more clicks on that Monday when the demand is high. That works super well if you have an optimized AdWords account. It does not work super well if your account is not optimized. If you don't have everything set up really tightly, it can really drain your budget. So it's something to keep an eye on and make sure that the funds are going towards, again, high converting keywords and things of that nature. One of the other points that I wanted to touch on is network. We talked about the search network, we talked about the display network, remarketing, shopping. So the fundamental difference between search and display is that search is an active network and display is a passive network. On the search network, somebody has to actually key in something to initiate your ad showing up. And what they key in has to be decently relevant to what you offer. So it's a nice match. The display network is just serving ads at people, much like print advertising, based on kind of where they happenstance are. So search typically has a much higher performance when compared to display. So one of the issues when you set up a Google AdWords account is that Google prompts you by default to use a campaign type that's called Search Network with Display Select. And you can see that actually here in the image on the right. You'll notice that Display Network box is pre-checked on your behalf. The issue with this is that you never want to treat different things in the same way. So, you know, basically we're taking the search network, which is a high performer, high return network, and then we're taking the display network, which is a lower performer, lower return network, and we're looping them under all of the same settings, including budget, which is not going to generate a best return. So if you have $30 a day to allocate, you really want to be putting 90% of that to search network exclusively and maybe 10% of that towards your display network. But in this system, you would be allocating 100% to whichever generates the most traffic, and sometimes that can turn out really poorly. So again, for those of you all who have an existing AdWords account, go into your accounts, look at your campaign types, make sure you do not have search network with display select, and if you do, please let me know so that way we can, you know, look through your search terms report and also show you how to shut that off. It is, yeah, not great. And then lastly, I'm just going to touch on keywords. I'm going to touch on this kind of briefly because we actually have a video on our YouTube channel that runs through this more in depth. And again, I don't want to keep everyone here for hours. Essentially, when you set up your AdWords account, you're prompted to enter your keywords. These are the search phrases under which you want Google to trigger your ads. Pretty simple. So again, if I'm a wedding venue, maybe it's a rustic venue, Portland, barn wedding venue near Portland, on and on and on. Well, what Google doesn't prompt you to do when you're putting in these keywords is to add in punctuation marks. Why would you do that? Well, the reason why you would do that is it actually completely changes the rules on how and where Google can show your ads. So what I mean by that is when you enter in a plain text search phrase, we'll say ketchup for sale, and you don't put any punctuation or any symbolism around that particular search phrase, you give Google maximum leniency to show your ad under what it considers to be closely related ideas and also synonyms. So just for simplicity's sake, if I put in ketchup for sale, I could potentially show up for mustard, mayonnaise, relish. Google looks at that and says, these are condiments, these are all closely related. So There are ways to fix that. There are ways to put parameters on it, and you can see that in our keyword match types video. Just know that if you put in those keywords just with regular text, that you're more often than not going to overexpose your account, and you're probably going to pay more than what you really should be. So go through your keyword list, look and see if it's plain text or not, and then let us know. And one of the last things that I wanted to touch on here is just kind of best practices for structure. More often than not, when I get into a lot of AdWords accounts, I see one campaign with one ad group with a handful of keywords with one ad. The problem with that is, again, you're not diversifying. You're putting all of your eggs in one basket, and that's not going to set you up for best success. What we like to do with our clients is we start with a big list of keywords. So send me any and every keyword that you think is relevant to your products, to your company, to all of the things. Then what we do is we start to basically create themes among those keywords. A really good kind of guiding principle is using the tabs on your website. If we're talking about, like, say, REI, for example, they're going to have a women's jacket section, they're going to have women's footwear, they're going to have women's accessories, right? So those would be 3 great campaigns in addition to the other categories that they have to start with. Then what you want to do is you want to look under that category and see how you can thematically group those keywords. So if we're talking about a campaign that is for, like on the slide says, women's down jackets, then what you want to do is you want to group your keywords together into ad groups of themes. So for instance, it might be North Face women's down jackets, it might be Columbia women's down jackets, it might be down jackets on sale, and then maybe it's just generic down jackets. Each of the keyword sets within those groups need to be really tightly related. I see often people will have one ad group covering their entire company, and they will have an array of keywords covering a litany of topics, and that's really not going to be beneficial to generating, again, kind of best profitability there. So sorry guys, I know I kind of talked a lot here. I'm not 100% used to the lecture mode. I much prefer Q&A and a little bit of engagement because I know that these can get long. But basically, you know, in closing, it's just really be informed. Every interaction that we have with anyone, whether it's a prospective client, a client, or someone who just needs more information, we want to make sure that they walk away understanding more about these systems because there are a lot of them and it's complicated. So, you know, whether you've been running an international e-commerce brand for the last 10 years or whether you are just now thinking about putting a website together, you know, please reach out to us. We have a great team of staff and we are more than happy to sit down and just help educate you on these different systems and help point you in the right direction. So with that, I think we are going to move to the Q&A portion. Okay, so let's see what we've got. So one of the first questions that we had earlier during the presentation was, can we do SEO on mobile too? So I wanted to just kind of touch on that. That was really a lot of what Jesse talked about was, you know, tactics that are essentially going to help your organic placement on Google. As you guys know, there was an update to the search engine algorithm. I think it was maybe last year, maybe 2 years ago. It was referred to as Mobilegeddon, and it was where Google looked at websites that were not responsive to mobile, and they actually penalized them. So really one of the best things that you can do for your SEO on mobile is make sure that you are using a mobile adaptive and responsive website. Most of the content management systems that exist now have that built in. So if you're using Shopify, if you're using, you know, a WordPress theme, if you're using Wix, Duda, whatever it might be, most of those are automatically going to have that set up to make a mobile website. Where this is going to be more problematic is for people that have legacy websites. So something that's maybe been around for, you know, 7 or, you know, 10 years or something to that effect. You really are going to need to evaluate possibly switching over to a newer website platform in order to help kind of put yourself in the best position. So Stephen, I hope that helped answer your question. If it didn't, then definitely reach out to me. Another question that we have on here is, do we have a reseller program? The answer to that question is yes. We do have a reseller program. we work with a lot of different entities that you know, then have many entities underneath them. So one of our clients that we work with is Atlas Van Lines, and Atlas Van Lines has 350 different agents across the United States and Canada. So we do work with Atlas to basically develop PPC, SEO, and web solutions for their agents to make sure that they're all putting their best foot out the door and maintaining brand. We have another one that says, what about impressions? How can we control that? Impressions are, well, it depends. So we'll put it this way. If your goal is to cap impressions, that's not very difficult. All you have to do essentially is change your budget or change the keywords that you're targeting. So, you know, if you're looking to basically extend the impressions, so let's say you have a really high performing keyword and you want to get a lot more exposure under that particular keyword, one of the best ways to do that is to actually pull it out and to put it in another part of the account. So that way you can have a campaign dedicated towards, you know, something that you need to get more exposure to. You can put more budget towards it and kind of treat it differently. Let's see. What is the difference in the campaigns for driving traffic to call versus come in? How do they target? Good question. So, you know, in our experience at this point, it is pretty difficult to track from campaign to someone actually walking in your store. There are ways that you can, you know, basically you can kind of make deductions, like if somebody searched for directions or something and clicked on your ad, or you can track people who, you know, click for directions on your website and things like that. And there will be better solutions for gauging foot traffic, but as of right now, they're not great. So I would say that, you know, probably your biggest priority there would just be focusing on driving traffic to the call function of your website. Because a lot of people are going to call to confirm your hours, to confirm directions or something to that effect, or ask a question about product before they come in. So based on how that conversation goes, and if you have call tracking recording that, it's going to be a good indication that somebody came in. So somebody else asked if we can go back to the slide about the setup hierarchy, campaigns, and such. So yeah, and we're going to be sending this out to everybody, so hopefully that would clear it up. And Christine, if you want kind of some greater details on the hierarchy and what that should look like, I'm happy to answer those. It might be more of an in-depth conversation than we have time for in the Q&A. And I know that you have some questions too about keyword conflicts and things like that. It's not, you can have keywords in multiple areas, but we can talk about why that would be beneficial or not beneficial.
Thanks, everyone.